I think Julian's that guy. Those are the words of Denzel Burke, former Ohio State cornerback, when I asked him what he thought about Julian Sayin, the former five-star quarterback, Alabama transfer during his first season at Ohio State. Julian Sayin arrived, as I mentioned, as a transfer from Alabama. He ends up being QB3 this year. I'm Steven, that's Stefan, that's Andrew. Okay, Stefan, did our truth teller, Denzel Burke, officially start the hype train for what Julian Sayin might be in 2025?
Yeah, and it's not because of that quote you just said. It's a quote from another question you asked like a second later where Steven was like, what is it about his arm talent or something along those lines? Or who does his arm talent remind you of? Who would you compare it to? Denzel sat there, and then he was about to say it, and then he said, I'm not going to say that. And he was going to say C.J. Stroud. And Denzel's right. It's not fair to Julian Sayin to put the C.J. Stroud label, expectations, all that on him right away. But what was C.J. Stroud going into his first season as a full-time starter? And how different is that from what Julian Sayin is going into his first season as what we presume is going to be as the full-time starter, right? Like, what you know about C.J. Stroud today is not what you knew about him 4 or 5 years ago, right? So that's where Julian is now. There's a lot that he has to accomplish to get to C.J. Stroud level, but what you could tell at what Denzel was kind of pointing at is when you look at the raw talent, the arm talent, the way the ball comes off his hands, it's comparable to a young C.J. Stroud. And that, if you're an Ohio State fan, that has to get you excited, right? Because you know what C.J. Stroud developed into. If nothing else, it tells you the potential of what Julian Sayin could be. And for a guy that we have a lot of questions about coming into this season, right? Like we did not see him play a ton his true freshman year. And there's not a ton of competition in that room that makes me think someone else is going to be the starter this year. That you point to Julian Sayin, you say, okay, the title defense starts with him, what he does at the quarterback position. And if that's what the ceiling can be, it's really promising for 2025 because that's the biggest question, right? Like there's a lot of pieces you lose, players you lose. We talked about the defensive line yesterday. You're losing all 4 of your starters there. If Julian Sayin is what we think he can be, if he can fill in for Will Howard seamlessly, the rest of the stuff is going to figure itself out because you've got yourself a quarterback.
Technically, he's ahead of CJ right now because he's thrown 12 passes and played 57 snaps. Yeah. CJ Stroud did not throw a pass his true freshman year, and he did not play 57 snaps. They also didn't play 16 games. They played 8 games. But listen, highly rated quarterback from California comes here, becomes a starting quarterback when they've got uber crazy wide receivers. Worked out last time. Andrew, is it fair or is it not fair? Is Denzel right? Is it not fair to put those levels of expectations on Julian Sayin when it's February and spring practice hasn't even started yet? He hasn't even technically won the job.
I don't think it's fair to say, like, the C.J. Stroud expectations. Like, I don't think we're there yet. I mean, he hasn't thrown a pass.
He's thrown a pass.
12
of them.
A meaningful pass. And that's
it means something to me.
I don't even know how to respond to that one. So we that completely threw me off course. But yeah, I look at, other 5-star quarterbacks, and you could be a good 5-star quarterback. You can have a good career as a 5-star quarterback and kind of live up to the billing and not be C.J. Stroud. Like, you can be a 5-star quarterback that gets talked about, maybe he's in that class with, Raiola and a couple of the other guys, and it's like, okay, well, maybe he's like the 3rd or 4th best quarterback in a class, which is a first-round pick. Okay, that means he had a good career at Ohio State. Doesn't mean he was C.J. Stroud, who went second. So I don't think those expectations are fair at this point. It is February 2025. However, the hype train has left the station, and it started to leave the station last April when we looked at Julian Sayin in spring practice, Steven and I, and we were like, whoa, okay, this dude's got it. Like, this dude could throw the football. And we kind of knew, or we kind of had an idea that we were going to be headed this direction, that in a year's time, we were going to be talking about Julian Sayin probably being the starting quarterback. Obviously, Devin Brown leaves the roster. Obviously, we have some turnover at that position, so things did clear out a little bit. So, I think the hype train had left the station, but I do think it's fair to say today you kind of found another gear. That might be the way to say it. You added some miles per hour to that train, because when you have a player like that who's about to go to the NFL, who has to stop himself from saying, he's kind of C.J. Stroud, like that's a big deal. So I don't think it's fair to say that and put that expectation on him, and I'm kind of glad he didn't, because then there will be a lot of people who had very, very high expectations for this kid who has not started a game at Ohio State. but I think it's fair to start to get your hopes up and say, okay, Ohio State might have something here.
There's a beautiful irony to Denzel Burke stopping himself from doing the C.J. Stroud thing, and you're listening to a video where we're doing the C.J. Stroud thing because Denzel Burke didn't do the C.J. Stroud thing.
So I've decided this year that I'm not going to be hyperbolic for the sake of being hyperbolic. I've decided that. We often in spring of college football, you do that because it's not games. You're looking for information, and you end up maybe hyping yourself up a little bit too much. I'm only going –
Unless it's Jeremiah Smith.
Unless it's worth it. Unless it's warranted. JJ was warranted. Devin Sanchez, it doesn't seem like it's warranted yet. No one has gone there yet. It's interesting to watch, but it's not warranted yet. I think it's fair to put these expectations on Julian Sayin because those are the expectations of the guy who brought him in here. Ryan Day is the one that said we want to recruit high-level quarterbacks. Ryan Day is the one that said the expectations for our quarterbacks are Heisman Trophy caliber, Heisman Trophy finalists, first-round draft picks. And the first two cracks at it as the head coach, that's what they did. So it wasn't – you can say, okay, yeah, it wasn't fair to compare C.J. Stroud to Justin Fields at this point in 2021. And then he was. That's the point here. That's what they're trying to do here. They got away from that the last 2 years, and we said it wasn't good enough. Will Howard won a national title, but you are still like, he's not quite the – because he's not the standard. The standard is Heisman Trophy finalist, first-round draft pick. And so if that's going to be your standard, that needs to be your expectation. And if it sounds like players are trying their hardest to tell you but not really tell you what it is, I listened to the way Denzel Burke talked about 3 quarterbacks today. He got asked about Will Howard, and it was that guy won a national championship. Kudos to him. Good leader. He talked about J.T. Barrett as a good leader. He talked about Lincoln Keenholz. He's good too. But with Julian Sayin, he was trying to, we didn't rev him to go there. He did that. You know who else they did that with? Jeremiah Smith. And that doesn't mean he's going to be generational like Jeremiah Smith is. But Denzel Burke doesn't lie. So, yes, I think it's completely fair to think that Julian Sayin can do that. It doesn't mean he's going to have 400 yards and 5 touchdowns against Texas. But it does mean that if he's where C.J. Stroud was in February – then I am expecting him to be where C.J. Stroud was in December because that's the expectation Ryan Day has for his quarterbacks. We'll continue to talk about this on Buckeye Talk and get the text 614-350-3315. We're at the Combine. Julian can't come here for 2 more years. And to that point, to your point of maybe he's the 3rd quarterback in his class, well, he was the number 1 quarterback in his recruiting class. So by that logic, maybe he should be the number 1 quarterback in his class. But that's 2 years from now. We'll worry about that then. Stefan, Andrew, Stephen, Julian Sayin, Lincoln Keenholz, March 17th, the battle begins to be Ohio State's next starting quarterback. See ya.